This is a GCSE presentation looking at respiration. To get started, all you have to do is come up with the word equation for photosynthesis and then come up with the chemical equation for photosynthesis. Pause the presentation now, come up with your answers either in your head or write them down, and when you're ready you can restart the presentation to see your answer. So pause the presentation now. So the equation for photosynthesis is we've got carbon dioxide plus water is turned into oxygen and glucose. In terms of the chemical formula, we need CO2, H2O, O2 and C6H12O6. Remember, of course, we need to do a balanced chemical equation, so we put a big number 6 in front of all the small chemical formula. You can, of course, go through and balance it out the long way and you'll get exactly the same answer. If this doesn't make sense, please go back and look at the other GCSE presentation going through photosynthesis before you go any further. If you're happy, you can continue on with this presentation, of course. In this presentation, we're going to look at the equation for respiration, and we're going to make comparisons between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. The equation you're looking at the moment is the equation for photosynthesis, which is the same equation you should have recalled at the start of this presentation. To get the equation for respiration, all we do is we simply rotate the arrow and then we rewrite the equation so it reads the correct way round, and we should have glucose plus oxygen is converted into water and carbon dioxide. And that's the equation for respiration. You'll notice the chemical formula is exactly the same with the 6's in front of all the small chemical symbols. Just like photosynthesis is an endothermic reaction, we have to know about respiration being an exothermic reaction. And it is exothermic because energy is released. So there's more energy released than is used in this reaction. And the energy that gets released is the energy that is used by cells for all living processes. And there are two types of respiration. There is aerobic respiration, which requires oxygen, and there's anaerobic respiration where there is no oxygen involved at all. And respiration, of course, occurs inside every cell, and the part of the cell, the organelle in the cell that is responsible for respiration, is called the mitochondria. Now, in terms of comparing the two types of respiration, we mentioned the terms aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. One of the questions they could ask you in the exam is the differences between these two, or they may ask you specifically to describe aerobic or anaerobic. And what you need to be able to say is that aerobic, oxygen is involved; anaerobic, there is no oxygen. In aerobic respiration, carbon dioxide and water are produced. Again, that's the chemical equation that we mentioned earlier in this presentation. You need to know the chemical equation and balanced as well as the word equation. In anaerobic, there is no chemical equation. You just need to know that the glucose is converted into lactic acid in animals. And we also have in aerobic respiration, large amount of energy is released. In anaerobic respiration, there's a small amount of energy released. I will do another presentation on anaerobic respiration, so make sure you do go through that in due course. You have to be able to do this from memory. You have to be able to make sure that you can identify the difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Why do we have this energy release? What do we need this energy for? Well, animals use it for three purposes. The first purpose is that we use the energy to get the chemicals that are absorbed in digestion, and we rebuild them into larger molecules. The energy is also needed for movement, and the energy is also needed for keeping warm. Without respiration, those three processes would not occur. In terms of respiration, there's three main chemical tests that they can mention in the exam. The first one is a glucose test. Because respiration requires glucose, You can use glucose as an energy source, so they would ask you to test how would you know that the substance is glucose. The second test is the starch test, and again, starch is a type of glucose that is stored in plants, and they would again say, how do you know that the food source is starch? You do a starch test. The last thing they can test for is carbon dioxide, which is produced in respiration. So they'll ask you, how do you know the gas produced in respiration is carbon dioxide? And you have to do a carbon dioxide test, also known as a lime water test. When you're doing a glucose test, we are testing for sugar, and we do what is called a Benedict's test. In a Benedict's test, we use Benedict's solution. You have to put the word solution in there. If you just write Benedict's, it's not enough. And we also need some sort of heat source, often in the form of a water bath beaker with hot water in it, or an electric one, whichever works. When you get Benedict's solution and heat, and we have sugar present, we will get a color change, and it will turn from blue into either green, yellow, orange, or red, depending on how much sugar there is. If there's a lot of sugar in this substance, it'll go red. If there's very low levels of sugar, it will turn green. In terms of a starch test, when you're doing a starch test, you need iodine solution, and the iodine will go from an orange brown color to a dark blue black color. A carbon dioxide test, or lime water test as it's also known as, is where we get lime water and we have to blow bubbles of gas into the water. There has to be bubbles in there. And if those bubbles of gas are carbon dioxide or contain carbon dioxide, the liquid inside the container will go from a clear, transparent to a cloudy, milky solution. And you have to use the word cloudy, you have to use the word milky, and you have to use the word solution. I know it doesn't sound very scientific, but that's the term they want for to give you the mark in the exam. And that's the lime water test. Last thing, just to finish off, is get a piece of paper, split it up into two, put photosynthesis on one side, respiration on the other, and just scribble down as many points as you can remember about photosynthesis and respiration. Once you've done that, go back through the photosynthesis presentation and the respiration presentation and add in a different color pen as many points as you can that you missed out the first time around. And just keep doing that, folks, until all this stuff sticks. You can also use science books, other websites, or any other sources of information that you can to add in additional points.